action. Chippity chop, chop, chopping with cherry. Bing! All right, hello everyone. This is my welcome to my sourdough video. Before we start talking about sourdough, I wanted to just give a quick update about this channel and kind of explain why I posted one video and went a little MIA. And that's because there's a pretty high activation barrier to me filming one of these videos. A couple reasons. One, and these are all self-imposed expectations. One is my kitchen is typically pretty cluttered and I don't want the internet to see that. So what you can't see off camera is that I have pushed all my clutter to the side. And you know, behind me is still pretty messy and all that kind of stuff. So I need to let go of that and really not care, which, you know, I kind of have let that go. A. 2, B is I need to look semi-presentable for the camera. Also don't care about that anymore. 3 is that there's a bit of organization that goes into pre-filming, which is getting your mise en place and all your ingredients ready. And you know, I realize that that's really not my style. I'm more of a stream of consciousness kind of girl. So, you know, this is going to be a wild ride from now on. We're just going to go with the flow. We're going to have a little bit of chaos and I'm okay with that. So get ready because we're rebranding after one video. Okay, the other activation barrier is editing. So I finished up the semester and I went to go edit my pre-filmed sourdough videos that I had. And I realized I say a lot, so I'm trying to work on that. I say I say okay, I say all those kind of filler things a lot while I'm talking. I ramble a lot when it comes to things that I'm really passionate about. So it's really hard for me to edit my videos. And obviously I'm not an expert at that kind of stuff. So that has been challenging. And I also just realized I had way too much footage, needed to kind of pare it down. So I've done a little bit of organizing of my thoughts. This is gonna be a 2-video series. This first one's gonna be on what equipment, what ingredients, and how to make sourdough. And then my second video is gonna be the science of sourdough so that you can start troubleshooting your own recipes. And that's kind of what was getting in the way of all my videotaping and what made it really difficult for me to pare down the video into a more digestible video in and of itself. So Mike suggested that I separate those 2 chunks. So that's what we're gonna do. So let's first talk about what equipment is absolutely necessary and what's optional to make your sourdough experience the best. So first of all, you do need a heavy Dutch oven. I have this Lodge Dutch oven that Mike got for me. These go on sale quite often, so I would highly suggest investing in one. So that's 1, non-negotiable. 2 is you need a kitchen scale, also non-negotiable as well, because sourdough making is all based on masses of ingredients and not volumes. So you definitely need a kitchen scale. I got this one off of Amazon for about $12 a few years back. Really, really reliable, really great. America's Test Kitchen also rated this as their best buy, most reliable kitchen scale. So highly recommend. And that's about it as far as required materials go. So now I'm going to tell you what other things you do need to make your sourdough, but you have a couple of options and you probably already have all the things that you need at home. Okay. So, let's see. Kitchen thermometer. I just highly suggest having one of these for all reasons, but it's not 100% necessary to make your sourdough bread. Again, I got this one off of Amazon for $10 to $12, super affordable, use it for everything. Bench scraper will make your life a lot easier. I have the silicone Nordic Ware bench scraper because I don't want to scrape my countertop. So this is a good investment as well. So I bought a Lom. So this is from Amazon. It's the Breadtopia brand and the handle is a little baguette. So it's super duper adorable. At the very minimum, I would highly suggest buying these double-edged razor blades because they're really thin and much sharper than your normal kitchen knife or a single edge razor blade. And this will make your scoring of your sourdough much better, or much easier, I should say. Next is a banneton or a proofing basket to let your dough sit in overnight, okay? So this is optional. These are about $10 off of Amazon, about $20 off of specialty kitchen websites that I've looked up. I got mine off of Amazon. $10, not too expensive. They might be sold out right now because so many people are making sourdough bread. If you don't have a banneton, then you can just take a bowl or a colander and line it with a tea towel or cheesecloth or anything like that, that you can use as a barrier so it doesn't stick to the bowl, okay? But I really prefer using bannetons, and I've invested in 4 of them total, so these can be kind of a slow collection thing for you. And then you need large kitchen bags. You can use a grocery bag, plastic, anything like that. It's just to put your bread in the proofing basket into the fridge overnight so the bread doesn't dry. So you just need something that will completely cover and leave a little bit of headspace for the bread. I invested in a packet of these jumbo hefty bags, and I dry them out and wash them and reuse them for proofing so it's not super wasteful, okay? All right, so that's all the equipment that you need. Let's talk about ingredients. So you will need a sourdough starter. This is Mabel. This is Esther, my sourdough starter, that I fed earlier this morning. I will not be going into how to make a sourdough starter, but it is about a week to 2 week time investment. Or you can go to your local bakery and ask them for some sourdough starter. Some bakeries are selling it. Some bakeries will provide it to you for free. There's a website, I will have to look it up and I'll link it in the description below, where you can send a self-addressed stamped envelope to someplace in Oregon, and they'll give you a little bit of dry starter and they give you instructions on how to rehydrate it. I will also link below to some websites that I find to be very reliable on how to start a sourdough starter, okay? But you'll need this. And then the other ingredient you'll need is water, distilled or filtered. So I use my fridge water. And you'll need salt, and you'll need flour. So let's talk about flour real quick. If you only have all-purpose flour, that's totally fine. That's the bare minimum. But I will absolutely require that you do not use bleached all-purpose flour. You need unbleached all-purpose flour. The bleached all-purpose flour will not have enough microbes and delicious organisms to grow a sourdough starter. So you really want to buy unbleached all-purpose flour. Some additions that will help with your bread making is bread flour. Again, unbleached would be ideal. That just has higher gluten content in it, which again, I'll talk about in the science video that's coming next. And then I always like to add a little bit of whole wheat flour because that has a lot more nutritious goodies for your microbes to munch on. Again, science video, okay? But the bread flour and the whole wheat flour aren't a necessity, but I would say unbleached all-purpose flour is at minimum what you need, okay? Action. All right, so I fed my sourdough starter. Today is Sunday. It is 12:28 p.m. right now. I fed my sourdough starter this morning at around 10 a.m., so it's been 2.5 hours. Just some info on my feeding. I always do a mass ratio of 1 to 1 to 1, so 1 part sourdough starter, so equal parts sourdough starter, water, and flour. So if I have 30 grams of sourdough starter, I add 30 grams of water and 30 grams of flour. As far as flour goes for my feeding, I'll do half all-purpose and half whole wheat. So in that scenario, I would be doing 30 grams starter, 30 grams water, and 15 grams all-purpose, 15 grams of whole wheat flour. And my water, I will usually do about within the 80-degree Fahrenheit range, okay? So that's going, and once my starter starts to grow a little bit, and probably as far as time goes, because of the activity of my starter, let's say 2 to 3 hours in, I start what's called my auto-lees, which is just mixing just your flour and your water together to start getting the flour hydrated and start your gluten development. So here I have on display a general recipe for sourdough, which we use baker's percentages for. So your flour is counted as your 100%. And so if we say flour is 100%, then we take 60 to 80% of that amount of flour for your hydration, 20% for starter, and 2% for salt, okay? That's your general recipe. So here, and you'll see my dirty coffee mug here, I use 400 grams of flour per loaf. So the 400 grams is my 100%. I split that 400 grams into certain percentages for the 3 types of flours that I typically use, okay? And so I'm making 2 loaves today, so we're gonna go with a total of 800 grams of flour. And so I do, 10% bread flour. So 10% of 800 is 80 grams, so I'll do that. And then I do 20% of whole wheat flour, which is 160 grams. And then the rest, so the rest of the 70% of the 800 grams is all-purpose. So total, I'm gonna do 560 grams of all-purpose, 160 grams of whole wheat, and 80 grams of bread flour. Today, I'm gonna try out a 70% hydration dough. So I take the 800 total grams of flour and I times it by 70%, and that tells me that I need 560 grams of water for today's 2 loaves that I'm making. If you're only making 1 loaf, then obviously all your masses are gonna be half of what I'm using, okay? My water, I always do a bit of fridge filtered water, and then I boil some water and mix it together until I get about water that's about 80 degrees, in the 80 to 90 degree range Fahrenheit. That's why having a kitchen thermometer will come in kind of handy, but if not, you just want like warm to the touch water, okay? So I'm gonna tare the weight of my bowl here, and I'm gonna go ahead and add my necessary flours. I need to turn this so I can see how much flour I need. Okay, so 560 grams of AP flour. And you don't have to be super exact. If I end up with 565 or whatever, I'm not ever concerned about that. So, my bread flour. So I have tried more than 10% bread flour, and that has never turned out really well for me. So 10% is probably where you want to cut it. So this is 80 grams of bread flour. And then I like a little bit of whole wheat in my bread, so that's why I add whole wheat flour to my loaves. You do not want to go above 40% whole wheat flour, otherwise your bread will come out super gummy, and I'll explain the science behind that in part 2 of this video series. So no more than 40%, and also just know that the more whole wheat flour you use, the thirstier it is, so you'll want to bump up that hydration level, okay? Okay, so 160 grams of whole wheat flour. You want to just mix your flour so it's just kind of evenly distributed. And then you're gonna add your 560 grams of water. Now you just want to mix everything together until you get a homogeneous, kind of shaggy looking ball. So I'll do this until all the pockets of like real liquid are gone. And then I'll go in with my hands and just kind of, you're not really kneading, you're just trying to get rid of all the pockets of super dry flour, okay? Okay, so I'm gonna wash my hands. I'm going to cover this bowl with a bowl cover, and then I'll wait another hour or so until my sourdough starter is ready, and then we'll come back and talk about incorporating the starter and the salt. All right, I got distracted with work. It's 2:40, so I think I don't really keep track of time all that much when I make sourdough anymore. I used to, write down what time I did things and be very precise, and now just kind of whatever fits my schedule, which maybe isn't the best practice, but whatever. So it's 2:40 now. I think my auto lease has been going on for at least an hour and a half to 2 hours now. So I'm going to now add my starter and add the salt, which I usually put away and I forgot. So how much salt did I need? 16 grams. I use kosher salt. I think that I've read some things saying you should not use iodized salt. So I would suggest some sort of kosher salt. Okay, so that's 16 grams. And then I'm gonna need, what was it? 160 grams of starter. So I'm going to tare the weight of my bowl and then just go ahead and take my starter and add 160 grams. So how do you know when your starter is ready? So what you'll notice is as your starter is growing, it's gonna be domed up top. So I can never remember if it's concave or convex, but I think it's concave. So it's gonna be domed, and then your starter will start to fall a little. And once that happens, you'll notice that it's now convexed, so down a backwards dome, okay? Once that happens, that's when your starter is ready. The other thing you can do is do what's called a float test. So you take some water, this is just leftover water from before. Take a spoon and scoop out a little bit of your starter and then put it into the water. I can't see my camera, so I don't know if you guys can see this or not. Oh, it's supposed to float. This sunk like a rock, but I'm still gonna use my starter anyways. But when your starter floats, that means that it is aerated enough that it will, it's ready. But again, I don't do the float test anymore, so I'm not super concerned about it. So I need 160 grams of starter. Again, if you add a little bit too much, that just means that your dough will rise and ferment a little bit faster. If you add less, then you might need longer fermentation time. So I have my starter in here, I have my salt. I'm gonna go ahead and add that. And then I do something called a slap and fold, okay? And so what we're gonna do here is, so at this point you don't wanna add any more flour to your dough, even if you think it's too sticky or anything. You should always be using water as your source of trying to release the dough from the counter or your hands or anything like that. So I usually keep a little spray bottle of water around. I'm gonna spray my hands and then I'm gonna spray my countertop. Just plain distilled water. And then I'm going to, in the bowl, kind of pick up and fold, so I kind of encompass and entrap maybe all the starter and the salt inside my ball of dough, okay? Put this off to the side. Put this on here, and so I do something called a slap and fold for 3 minutes. So I have a timer over here that I'm gonna start. What you wanna do is you're gonna pick up the dough, slap and fold. Pick it up, slap and fold. Pick it up, slap, fold. And you just wanna do this for 3 minutes. So depending on your hydration level, like the last loaf that I made was 60% hydration and it was a lot stiffer than this. So I wasn't able to slap and fold, then I just kneaded it for 3 minutes. So just your traditional kneading motion, which for those that are not familiar with how to knead, you just take it, and so instead of the slap and fold, you're gonna take the heel. Did it stop recording?
No.
Oh, Mike's behind the scenes, it's fine. Take the heel of your hand and you push in, pull up, push in, pull out, push in, like this, okay? And so what's the purpose of this step right here? I like to do it this way, slap and fold, kneading, whatever it is, because A, this starts your gluten development, B, it helps distribute your starter into your dough, the starter and the salt. And I find this to be the easiest and most effective way of doing it without overworking your dough. Okay, so a little bit of a good workout too, upper body, you know, always looking for those gains. All right, so there's 3 minutes. I don't oil or wet the bowl at all. And then I'm just gonna place my ball of dough in here, seam side down. And then I'm gonna cover this and let it rest for 30 minutes. And then we'll come back and do what we call a stretch and fold, okay? All right, we're back. It's been 30 minutes. Here's my dough. Here's some fresh water. So we're gonna do what's called a stretch and fold. And I usually do 3 to 4 of these every half hour until I get a good window pane. So let's first go over how to do the stretch and fold. So my fresh water here so I can wet my hands. So just dip my hands into my water, and then you're gonna imagine that there's 4 sides to your bowl, which is round, so there are no sides. And I'm just gonna put my hand in, pick up one side of the dough, pull up, stretch, and fold. Turn the bowl 90 degrees, stretch, and fold. 90 degrees, stretch and fold. 90 degrees, stretch and fold for 4 turns overall. After my first stretch and fold, like to kind of flip my dough over so that it's seam side down. So then I'll cover this and then wait another 30 minutes and stretch and fold again, another 30 minutes, do it 3 times, potentially up to 4 times. So I have a headache today and I'm just not feeling well. So I'm gonna try to splice in video from the first time I filmed all this that had some really good explanation about window pane formation and what you're looking for. So insert here. I'm gonna show you its window pane right now, and then we can see how it develops over time. So what you do is make sure that your hands are really wet. So just wet my fingers a little bit more, and you're gonna pull some of your dough up and you wanna stretch it. And we want this really thin window pane, but you can see that I can't actually get that window pane without my dough ripping. And so that tells me that I have not created a decent enough gluten structure yet because I get these rips. And you'll see that as we keep stretching and folding, that window pane is gonna become stronger and stronger. But I just wanna show you that we have good gluten development because of the window pane. And this is why it's so important for you to also use your hands to manipulate the dough, because you can definitely feel a difference with how soft and supple this dough is now. So hopefully you can see the light coming through the dough. And this window pane shows me that I have really good structural development inside of my dough. We're back. It's 10 p.m. So I finished my stretch and folds probably around 3:30, 4 o'clock. So really my bulk proofing started at 2:30. So it has been, can I do math? 7.5 hours. Room temperature bulk fermenting. So after I finish my stretch and folds, I just leave the dough in the bowl on the countertop at room temperature. All right, so what I've already done is what we call the pre-shaping. So I did that off camera because I was on the phone with a friend, but I wanted to get it started. So I took my handy dandy bench scraper, I very carefully tilted the bowl and without like disturbing the dough too much, pulled all the dough out onto my bench. I split it into 2. And then we do something called a pre-shape, where you really want to get the skin of the dough or the top of the dough as taut as possible. This gets your gluten structure kind of in order, and then it also starts creating some tension on the outside of the dough, which is gonna help with your oven spring that we'll talk about in my science video, okay? And so the way that you do that is I form the dough, or the 2 mounds that I want, and I'm gonna just do a few of these to show you what you should have done, okay? So you take your bench scraper, so it is kind of necessary to have this. I usually spray it with some water, and you're gonna come from the back and you're gonna put your scraper underneath up to the front, so basically 180, and take your hand to pull your scraper out. And you're just gonna keep doing this in a circular fashion And you know, sometimes I watch these sourdough videos and people are a lot faster about it. I think they've had a lot more practice. Hopefully you can see this and my sign's not obstructing, sorry. Okay, and then you leave this on your countertop uncovered for 20 to 30 minutes to create kind of a skin and to get that gluten to relax again, okay? And then once you're done with that, now we're gonna shape and put it into our banneton. So you can see these are the two different shapes that I have. I have my oval banneton, which I prefer, and then you have a circular banneton that you can purchase. I have a little shaker here of half AP flour, half rice flour. Rice flour doesn't absorb into your dough as well as regular flour does. So this helps create a barrier between your cloth and your dough. So even if you're using a bowl and cheesecloth, you still want to dust it with some flour, and you basically want that towel to be your designated sourdough towel from now on. So I'm gonna just lightly dust, don't go too crazy. And you know, the more and more you use these bannetons and that particular towel, the more essentially non-stick it becomes, okay? Okay, and then I also do a little bit of dusting over the top skin that has formed, okay? Just super light. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and shape this one. This is gonna go into my round banneton, so I'm gonna do shaping for a round loaf, okay? Okay, so you want to pick this up. You want to be really swift but gentle in doing this. So I'm going to pick it up. I'm going to put it seam side up. Okay, and you'll notice that the skin makes it so that your dough isn't as sticky. The flour also makes it so that the dough isn't as sticky. Once you flip it over, you'll see that the bottom part has retained a lot of moisture. You haven't let it dry out, so it's a lot stickier, and we're gonna take advantage of that stickiness, okay? Also, I'm gonna wet my hands just to make my job a little bit easier. Always keep my spray bottle on hand. And so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pull up from the top and pull down and get that dough to stick a little bit. And then I'm gonna pull in the sides, and I'm gonna do kind of a stitching method, not quite, okay? And then I'm gonna pull the bottom up and then start dragging, okay? So I drag from left to right, top to bottom. And I wanna form a pretty tight round ball with the seam on the bottom, okay? And then very swiftly, what I wanna do is I'm gonna pick this up again and place it into my banneton seam side up. Okay, confident, swift, smooth, and confident, okay? And then I just do a little bit more stitching on the bottom here and get that sticky dough to really stick together, okay? So there's that one. And then now we'll do the oval banneton. So again, I'm gonna flip it over. Okay. So this one, I'm gonna stretch out a little bit more kind of in a rectangle. And then we're gonna do similarly top down about a third of the way, sides in, and then over, and we make a log. And so unlike the round one where I went left to right to drag and try to make the top more taut, this time I'm just gonna do front and back to really retain that oval, long, logular shape. I don't think logular is a word, but that's fine. Okay, so we're gonna pull and drag. I don't know if you can see, but there's like this kind of like weird swirly part here. I do pull down the edges a little bit, pull and tuck, just to get rid of those, because that gives a weak spot in your dough where it can explode while it's baking, okay? And it just makes your scoring not as pretty. Okay, so likewise, gonna lift this up, seam side up into the banneton. Swift, but confident. That wasn't as confident as normal, but that's okay. And then I'm gonna do some stitching again, just to make sure that bottom side is sealed well, okay? And then I do an additional quick sprinkle of flour on top. And then I have my hefty bags that I mentioned at the beginning of the video. And just leave headspace in there. I do close the bag all the way. I don't really worry about keeping it partially open. So we're gonna put these in the fridge overnight. I've never gone over 12 hours in the fridge, so I don't have a ton of advice on whether or not that's a good or bad thing. So 10 p.m., I'm probably gonna bake around 7 a.m. tomorrow. So we'll come back and we'll discuss how to bake our bread. Woo! Good morning. It's 8:10 a.m., so woke up a little bit later than I had anticipated. So what I usually do in the morning is I will wake up, because I'm not naturally a morning person. I wake up, I start my oven, and I put my Dutch oven inside the oven when it's cold and preheat to 500 degrees Fahrenheit, okay? Push start, and then I usually go back upstairs and go to sleep again for another hour. So from the time that I start preheating to 1 hour, that's how long I want my Dutch oven to preheat in there, okay? So those, I have 2 Dutch ovens in there right now since I'm making 2 loaves. So that's in there, nice and hot. So I'm gonna take, and I'm gonna do this kind of all, I'm gonna explain what I'm gonna do, and then I'm gonna do it, and then you can watch me do it, and I'll speed up the video a little bit as I'm doing my tasks. So I take the bread out of the fridge, don't let it rest at room temperature or anything like that, and you want to take it out of the Banneton. I put a little bit of extra flour on top, so to emphasize my decorative scoring. I flip it out onto a piece of parchment paper. So I reuse my parchment paper a couple times until it becomes unrecognizable, just so I'm not as wasteful. And then after I'm done scoring, I take the Dutch oven out of the oven, place the bread inside, cap it, and then put it back in the oven. And then I'm gonna let it bake at 500 degrees covered for 20 minutes, okay? So you'll have to mess around with your oven temperature and all that kind of stuff. I have a gas oven. I don't know if that makes any difference, but I have found that if I don't put a sheet pan underneath my Dutch ovens to kind of block a little bit of the heat, then I end up with a burnt bottom. So right now I have a full baking sheet on one oven rack. My next oven rack is the next like rack up or whatever, and my Dutch ovens are on there, okay? Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and start scoring and get the first, well, I guess both loaves into the oven. So I'm also gonna be scoring with my lom. And just a quick thing about this, so when you put your bread into your oven and it's covered in the Dutch oven, we get something called oven spring, which is an expansion of the bread. And so the scoring just makes it a more controlled expansion. Some people like a more rustic look, and so you can skip the scoring and your bread crust will just kind of burst in places where there's a weak spot. And so you don't get a control over what your finished loaf will look. It'll just kind of look crackly on top. Some people like that look. I prefer the scored look, and that's why I score my bread. So that's why it's not super important for you to have that, okay? When you score, you want to go in at a rough 45-degree angle, and you want to be swift but confident, just like when we were setting up the proof. You just want to go as fast and one swift move as possible. If you kind of saw or stop and stuff like that, it kind of ruins your scoring, okay? So you'll notice that your loaf has puffed up and it's a little bit bigger than it was last night. Time for the second loaf. wasn't quite deep enough, so I had to rescore. All right, so my timer is set for 20 minutes at this point. At the 20-minute mark, I'm going to take my loaves out of my Dutch oven, so uncover it because they're essentially steaming in there right now. So you're gonna take at the very minimum, you need to uncover the Dutch oven and let the bread kind of be exposed to the direct heat of the oven so you get that nice crusty exterior. Through my trial and error, I have found that if I leave my loaves in my Dutch oven, the bottom gets burnt. And so I take my loaf out of the Dutch oven and put it directly on my baking rack for the last 10 to 15 minutes. And I'll rotate my loaves during that time. So I won't really narrate what I'm about to do next, and I'll just kind of hold my phone as I'm uncovering my bread so you can see what it looks like and all that kind of stuff. Or maybe I'll try to set my tripod over here so we can get a look at what that looks like. All right, see you in a little bit. My timer's about to go off, so we'll see what the bread looks like, okay? And then pop it back in the oven. So then I'm going to put it back in for 5 minutes, rotate, and then another 5 minutes, and just keep an eye on it until the crust is the exterior is nice brown and crusty. And then you want to let your bread cool for at least a few hours. So we'll taste test after the bread is cool, cut into it, look at the crumb. We're back. I went for a run and I'm getting ready for lunch now, so I'm gonna crack into this loaf. So here is one of my loaves, my round bowl. I have this really nice ear from my scoring. I'm actually quite proud of this. It's probably the best ear that I've ever had. And we're gonna go ahead and just cut it and look at the cross section, the inside of the dough, which we call our crumb. So what we're looking for is even distribution of your air bubbles in your bread. If you get really, really random large bubbles or bubbles that are mainly towards the outside of your dough or your bread, then that is a sign that you've underproofed your bread, I think. Overproofing, I believe, means that your dough comes out super flat. So my bubbles aren't super evenly distributed. So I would say that this crumb is, I would give it a C+, B- range. Let's go ahead and cut off a piece and taste test. The crust is really chewy and slightly crunchy, which I like. I've been trying to optimize the tang in my bread, and this batch is not as tangy as I would like. So I hope you have found this video informative. I apologize for how long it is, but sourdough is a process, and I wanted to make sure that this was as informative as possible for everyone that was interested in making sourdough during this time, because I know that instant yeast is hard to come by at the grocery stores, and as long as you can get some flour, which I have found that it's easier to find at the stores, you can start making your own beautiful bread. Please let me know if you start making your own sourdough bread. Send me pictures, comment down below on what else you'd like to see next, and I'll see you guys later. Quiet on set, action! Being a YouTube star is hard. Action! Careful. What?
I stopped it because I thought you were done.
After insert here? Okay, that's fine. At least not the whole step, so I am gonna mix it with my spatula. Oh my god. I don't like it. Action! Like, oh my god, I should probably fact check that, but I'm recording this on my phone, so I can't. Oh god. Cut! You know I'm gonna have a blooper reel, right?
The B reel?
B reel?